The world of Theloria was painted in shades of charcoal and silver, a realm that had long forgotten the full, warm kiss of an unhindered sun. Here, in the shadowed wilds, the trees were ancient sentinels, their gnarled branches clawing at a sky perpetually veiled by mist and secrets. Their bark was a history of forgotten ages, etched with the glyphs of wind in time, and their roots drank deep from the earth's hidden veins, drawing up a potent, untamed magic. They whispered to one another in a language of rustling leaves and groaning wood, secrets that no mortal man could ever hope to comprehend. Through this sprawling, primeval forest, silver rivers flowed like liquid moonlight, their waters cold and clear, carving relentless paths through mountains of black obsidian that jutted from the land like the teeth of a slumbering god. Upon this land, a curse was laid, a stain woven into the very fabric of a bloodline. The Lupari clan, a people as wild and enduring as Theloria itself, carried it in their marrow. They were the shapeshifters, the moon-touched, the werewolves. Their existence was a brutal dichotomy, a constant, violent war waged within a single soul, the heart of man tethered to the savage spirit of the beast. This duality was both their strength and their damnation, granting them the power of the apex predator, but forever chaining them to the lunar cycle's whims. And for this power, they were hated, they were feared, they were hunted. The iron-fisted empire of Espera, a civilization of gleaming spires, dogmatic faith, and cooled hard steel, saw the Lupari not as a people, but as a plague to be eradicated. Vesperan inquisitors clad in silver-etched armor and righteous fury were the instruments of this purge. They hunted the Lupari with a zeal that bordered on the worship, their prayers mingling with the screams of the slain. For generations, the blood of werewolves had stained the Fitorian soil, a grim tribute to an unwinnable war. A fragile, unspoken truce had settled in recent years, born not of peace but of exhaustion, leaving the surviving Lupari scattered, hidden within the deepest, most impenetrable corners of the wilds. But on this fateful night, peace was a forgotten word. A blood moon ascended, a celestial omen of such terrifying beauty that it silenced the forest's nocturnal choir. It was not the gentle, mother-of-pearl orb of poets' dreams. This was a festering wound in the heavens, a gaping, sanguine maw that bled its crimson light down upon the world below. It hung there, swollen and malevolent, bathing the obsidian peaks in a spectral glow and turning the silver rivers to veins of flowing blood. The very air grew thick, heavy with an ancient predatory energy that promised violence and madness.
High on a wind-swept promontory, overlooking the vast expanse of the forest, Alan felt the moon's call as a physical violation. He was an alpha in exile, stripped of his pack and his birthright by the bitter politics of survival and betrayal. His throne was now a cold slab of granite, his kingdom an empire of solitude. The wind whipped his dark hair across a face that seemed carved from the very mountains he stood upon. All hard lines and stark angles, a testament to a life of hardship. But it was his eyes that held the true measure of his soul. Irises of molten gold, glowing with an inner fire that flickered with the twin flames of feral instinct and profound human sorrow. Under the lurid glare of the blood moon, the curse began its agonizing work. It started as a low thrum deep in his bones, a vibration that resonated with the pounding of a primal drum. A feverish heat coiled in the pit of his stomach and spread like wildfire through his veins, setting every nerve alight. His senses, already preternaturally sharp, exploded into a dizzying cacophony of input. He could smell the damp petrichor of the soil a league away, the sweet decay of fallen leaves, the distant, musky scent of a stag startled from its slumber. He could hear the frantic beat of a rabbit's heart burrow deep beneath the earth, the whisper-soft brush of an owl's wings as it sliced through the air. The world became a tapestry of the night, vivid and terrifyingly immediate. This was the prelude to the change, the savage symphony that heralded the beast's awakening. He fought it, as he always did. He clung to the tattered remnants of his humanity, focusing on the memory of his father's face, the sound of his mother's lullaby, anything to anchor the man against the rising tide of the wolf. The muscles in his back and shoulders bunched and spasmed, bones threatening to crack and reshape. A low growl, born of pain and instinct, rumbled in his chest, an involuntary tremor he could not suppress. His gilded eyes, already inhuman, dilated until they were pools of liquid gold staring into the crimson-soaked darkness. He was losing. The moon was too strong tonight, its call too seductive, too absolute. And then it happened. A scream. It was not the shriek of a panicked animal or the cry of some nightmarish forest creature. It was female, human, and it sliced through the oppressive silence with the clean, sharp edge of a razor. It was the sound of pure, undiluted terror, yet laced with the threat of furious defiance. It did not belong here, in the heart of my desolate sanctuary. It was the sound of the world that I'd fled, the world that hunted me. It was the sound of Vespera.
By all the laws of nature and instinct that governed his existence, the sound should have triggered the final cataclysmic shift. It was the cry of prey, vulnerable, exposed, and trespassing. The wolf within him should have surged forward, driven by the singular, bloody imperative to hunt, to rend, to kill. His mind screamed at him to flee, to retreat deeper into the shadows where the hunters could not follow. Every scar on his body, many of them etched by Vesperan silver, burned with the memory of that hatred. She was the enemy. But something else answered the scream. It was not the wolf. It was not the man. It was something older, deeper, a force buried so far within his soul he had never known it was there. As the last echo of her cry faded into the whispering trees, a fire of a different kind ignited in his veins. It was not the hot, rage-fueled fire of the transformation, but a searing, white-hot blaze of something else, a connection, a pull. It was a raw, undeniable magnetism that seized him with the force of a physical blow, yanking the very strings of his fate. It bypassed all reason, all instinct, all hatred. His half-formed snarl died in his throat, replaced by a strangled gasp. The agonizing pressure in his bones receded, the change halting mid-torment. He was no longer being pushed by the moon's savage call. He was being drawn by her scream. He didn't understand it. The sensation was utterly alien. It was a compass needle in his soul, and it was pointing directly, unerringly toward the source of that sound. He wasn't chasing prey to devour it. He was being summoned, compelled by a power far greater than the lunar curse. He felt it as a resonant hum in his soul, a song only he could hear, a forbidden harmony that promised both ecstasy and oblivion. With the roar, that was a maelstrom of confusion, fury, and this new, terrifying compulsion, Alan launched himself from the promontory. He landed on the forest floor with a ground-shaking impact that would have shattered the bones of any mortal man. His body still caught in the agonizing limbo between man and beast. His form was broader, more powerful than a human's, his fingers tipped with thick, black claws. But the wolf's full might was held in abeyance by this inexplicable force. He ran. The world became a blur of dark trunks and grasping thorns. He moved with a speed that defied physics, a dark phantom flowing through the blood-drenched woods. His golden eyes cut through the gloom, every sense now singularly focused on that one invisible thread connecting him to her. He could smell her now, the scent carried on the wind, weaving its way through the pine and damp earth to find him. It was a paradox, an impossible fragrance that warred with his senses and set his heart hammering against his ribs. Jasmine, a delicate, intoxicating floral note that spoke of cultivated gardens and civilized places. It was a scent of softness, of beauty, of everything he was not. And beneath it, a second scent, sharp and cold and lethally familiar, steel, forged, polished, and recently touched by blood. It was the signature scent of a Vesperan huntress.
Enemy. The word echoed in the rational corner of his mind, a frantic, desperate warning. Trap, ambush, death. But the pull was relentless, an invisible chain hauling him forward, tightening with every powerful stride. The jasmine called to a part of him that craved solace, the steel to the warrior that craved a worthy opponent. The combination was intoxicating, a poison he drank willingly. He was a moth flying into a silver flame, a wolf answering the call of the shepherd's bell, a creature of darkness drawn inexorably toward a light that would mean his utter annihilation. In that singular, world-altering instant, as his paws, not yet fully man's feet nor wolf's, thundered against the cursed earth, he knew nothing else mattered. Not his exile, not his pack, not the generations of hatred, not the moon burning like a wrathful eye in the sky. All that existed was the scream that had become a song, the scent that was both poison and perfume, and the woman who waited at the heart of the storm. Their worlds, held apart for centuries by a chasm of blood and fear, were about to collide, and in that collision, born of forbidden fire under a bleeding moon, lay a desire so potent, a destiny so twisted, it would not merely doom them both, it would unravel the foundations of their world and set it ablaze. Alan's paws, armed with claws that could shred granite, thundered against the damp earth, propelling him forward in a blur of dark muscle and midnight fur. He was a force of nature unleashed, a living embodiment of the forest's rage. The final thicket of thorn vines and ancient ferns exploded before him as he burst into the clearing, his arrival announced by a guttural snarl that was half wolf, half tormented man. The air here was thick with the coppery tang of fresh blood and the intoxicating, impossible scent of jasmine and steel. It coated his tongue, flooded his senses, and brought his cataclysmic charge to a skidding halt. He stood, panting amidst the ruins of a forgotten temple. Crumbling pillars, choked with ivy, reached like skeletal fingers toward the bleeding moon. A great stone altar, its surface stained with centuries of moss and ritual, dominated the center of the clearing. Moonlight, filtered through the shattered dome of a long-vanished roof, cast a web of crimson light and deep, dancing shadows across the scene. It was a place of dead gods and lingering power, now a makeshift abattoir.
At the foot of the altar lay the source of the blood scent, the carcass of a rogue beast. It was a monstrous thing, vaguely lupine in shape, but twisted by some foul magic, its fur matted with black gore and its limbs bent at unnatural angles. It was not of his pack, not of any pack he knew. It was a corruption, a thing of pure malice, its dead eyes staring sightlessly at the sky. Its dark blood pooled like ink upon the ancient flagstones, steaming in the cool night air. And then he saw her. She was sprawled on the far side of the slain beast, her back pressed against the cold stone of the altar as if to draw strength from it. Lyrian. Though he had never known her name, his very soul seemed to recognize her. She was the daughter of the Empire's High Inquisitor, the scion of his people's most hated enemy, and she was a vision of terrible beauty forged in the crucible of violence. Her dark hair was a mess of tangled silk, clinging to a face pale with shock and exertion. Her Vesperin leathers, practical and severe, were scuffed and torn. In one hand, she clutched a silver dagger, its blade dripping with the monster's black blood. The weapon, so lethal to his kind, gleamed with a malevolent purity in the moonlight. Yet her knuckles were white, her hand trembling not just with fear, but with the spent adrenaline of a life-or-death battle. But it was her eyes that seized him, that shackled him in place more effectively than any silver chain. They were the color of the deep woods, a brilliant, defiant emerald, and they were wide with a terror so profound it threatened to swallow her whole. Yet beneath that terror, a fire still burned. He saw the defiance of a warrior who would not be broken, the hardened resolve of a huntress who had just faced down death and won. She stared at him, this new, far greater monster that had just crashed into her sanctuary, and her chin lifted almost imperceptibly. In that instant, their gazes locked. Molten gold met forest emerald. The world shattered. It was not a sound, but a feeling, a seismic shift in the fabric of reality itself. The magnetic pull that had dragged him here erupted into an unbearable, silent shriek within his soul. The savage fire of the blood moon, the incandescent rage of the wolf, was instantly and violently extinguished, as if doused by a tidal wave of ice, a wave that emanated from her.
A howl of pure agony was ripped from Alan's throat as the transformation reversed against his will. It was not the gradual, aching retreat of the change that followed the moon's descent. It was a convulsive, bone-breaking recoil. His extended muzzle cracked and shortened, his powerful lupine jaw snapping back into a human shape. The thick, dark fur that covered his body retracted into his skin with 1,000 fiery pinpricks of pain, leaving goose flesh in its wake. His spine, elongated for the wolf's gait, compressed with a series of sickening crunches that sent black spots dancing in his vision. The immense power, the connection to the raw, wild magic of Thaloria drained from him in a dizzying rush, leaving an echoing void in its place. He collapsed to his knees, his body a war zone of snapping tendons and reforming bones. He was left utterly human, naked, shivering, and horrifyingly vulnerable. The night's chill, which the wolf's pelt had rendered non-existent, now bit into his exposed skin. His heightened senses dulled, the world shrinking back into the muted, narrow perception of a man. The scent of blood and jasmine, once a symphony of information, was now just a cloying smell in the air. Through a haze of pain and disorientation, he looked up at her. He saw her not as a hunter, not as an enemy, but as the epicenter of his world's undoing. He was captivated and snared by a mystery far deeper than the curse that defined him. Why? Why did her gaze hold the power to unmake the beast? Why did the sight of her silence the moon's savage call? Lyrian watched. Her dagger still held aloft, her breath hitched in her throat. The terror in her eyes had been joined by a disbelieving awe. The monster that had burst from the trees, a creature of nightmare and legend, had convulsed and broken apart, resolving into the form of a man who now knelt before her, as exposed and vulnerable as a newborn. She saw the raw agony of his transformation on his face, saw the golden eyes that still held the ghost of the beast's fire, now banked and flickering with confusion. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the whisper of the wind through the ruins and the frantic, unsteady beat of their two hearts. What are you?" she finally whispered. Her voice, though barely audible, cut through the charged air and struck him to his core. It was not the shrill cry of a victim, nor the harsh command of an inquisitor. It was a blade wrapped in the finest silk, sharp, questioning, yet possessed of a strange melodic cadence that vibrated through him. It was the voice that belonged to the jasmine, to the emerald eyes, to the impossible power that had just brought him to his knees. And that heartbeat, as he knelt, disarmed and unmade before the woman who should have been his executioner, the hook was set. This was no chance encounter. This was fate, a cruel and beautiful design spun in the shadows. A love, terrifying and profound, had just been born from the carnage of a slaughter, its first breath drawn in a desecrated temple under a blood-red moon. It was a bond that would not be denied, a passion that would grow, that unravel families, topple empires, and burn the world to ash.
The night of the blood moon did not end in a clean parting, but in a fractured, disbelieving silence. They had stared at each other across the body of the slain beast, two impossible points of a hostile universe suddenly forced into the same orbit. No killing blow was struck, no capture was made. Lyrian, her mind reeling from the sight of a beast unmaiden to a man, had eventually lowered her silver dagger. Alan, raw and vulnerable in his human form, had faded back into the woods that were his only shield. But the connection, the invisible, incandescent thread that had snapped taut between them, did not sever. It remained, a phantom limb connecting their souls, an incessant ache that promised no peace. Days blurred into a haze of stolen glances and haunted thoughts. For Alan, solitude, once his bitter comfort, had become a cell. The silence of his domain was no longer filled with the familiar sounds of the wild, but with the echo of her voice, a melody of silk and steel that played endlessly in his mind. He was haunted by the memory of her emerald eyes and the inexplicable power they held over him. The moon's pull, the ancient curse that had defined his entire existence, now felt like a secondary concern, a dull, familiar ache compared to the sharp, new obsession that was Lyrian. He found himself tracking her, not as a predator stalks its prey, but as a scholar follows a celestial mystery. It was a compulsion that defied all logic, a betrayal of every survival instinct hammered into him since birth. He shadowed her through the borderlands, the treacherous and unstable territory where Thaloria's untamed wilds frayed at the edges and met the rigid, orderly expanse of Vespera. It was a land of contradictions, a visual testament to the war between their worlds. Here, ancient, gnarled oaks, dripping with moss and secrets, stood defiantly just meters from the immaculately patrolled stone walls and gleaming spires of the spirit outposts. Wild, overgrown game trails petered out into neatly cobbled roads. The air itself was a battleground of scents. The rich, dark loam and primal musk of Thaloria clashing with the sharp scent of coal smoke and civilization drifting from the Empire. This liminal space, belonging to neither side, became their unspoken sanctuary.
He watched her from the shadows, learning her patrols, her habits, the way she moved with a fluid grace that was both warrior and dancer. And he sensed something more, something that set his teeth on edge and made the beast within him stir with a mixture of fear and fascination. There was a power emanating from her, a clean, cold aura that hummed just beneath her skin. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but to his senses it was as clear as a beacon. It felt like starlight and winter frost, and it tasted of pure, untainted silver. She was no ordinary huntress. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the marrow, that her very blood was anathema to his kind, a liquid poison forged from the cosmos itself. The stories, the old Lupari legends of a Vesperan prophecy came back to him in fragments, tales of a chosen guardian, a vessel whose blood carried the essence of star-forged silver, destined to be the ultimate weapon, the final death of his people. and he, an exiled alpha, was drawn to her like a tide to a deadly moon. Their first meeting after that night was a tense, silent affair in a grove of silver-barked birches at twilight. The world was hushed, caught between the breath of day and the exhale of night. Neither spoke. They simply watched each other across a clearing, two sworn enemies, testing the bounds of an impossible truce. But the pull was too strong to be denied, and one meeting became two, then three. In the deepening twilight, words finally began to surface, tumbling between them like forbidden spells, each one a small act of treason. They met in hidden dells and forgotten groves, their conversations cloaked by the gathering dark. He learned of her life, a gilded cage of duty and expectation, as the daughter of the formidable High Inquisitor Valthor. She learned of his, a life of loss, of being hunted, of the constant internal war between his two natures. One evening, as the sky bled violet and the first stars pricked the darkness, they stood near a whispering stream. The tension was a living thing between them, a taut wire of fear and fascination. "Your people call us monsters," Alan growled, the sound low and rough. He kept his distance, his posture wary, every muscle coiled. "You hunt us, flay us, hang our pelts as trophies. You believe we are mindless beasts who delight in slaughter."
Lyrian did not flinch from the bitterness in his voice. Her emerald eyes watched him, searching. "I saw you that night," she said, her voice soft but unwavering. "In the temple. The beast I killed was mindless. It was a creature of pure rage. But you are not like it. The moon makes us all its slaves," he countered, a muscle twitching in his jaw. "What's to stop me from becoming that beast and tearing you limb from limb right now?" "You won't," she stated, a certainty in her tone that she could not logically explain. He took a step closer, unable to help himself, drawn by that invisible current. The air crackled. "And why not? Because your eyes can unmake me? What sorcery is that? What are you?" He was so close now that he could see the faint tremor in her hand where it rested on the hilt of her dagger. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, wild drumbeat that was equal parts terror and a strange, exhilarating thrill. This was madness. He was the enemy, the creature she had been trained her entire life to kill without hesitation. Her duty was clear. Her bloodline demanded it. The prophecy that hung over her like a shroud insisted upon it. Yet as he took another step, closing the space between them, she did not draw her weapon. His presence was overwhelming, a raw, earthy power that called to a dormant, wild part of her own soul she never knew existed. He slowly raised his hand, and she watched, mesmerized, as his fingers, calloused and scarred, brushed against the back of her leather-gloved hand. A shock, sharp and electric, jolted through them both. It was more than static. It was a spark of volatile magic, a clash of their fundamental natures. His moon-cursed blood and her star-forged essence. Alan pulled his hand back as if burned, his golden eyes wide with shock. Lyrian gasped, her heart leaping into her throat. In that single, fleeting touch, the chasm between duty and desire became a battleground within her. Everything her father had taught her, every vow she had sworn to the Empire, screamed at her to run, to fight, to kill this thing that stood before her. But the wild thrill, the terrifying and beautiful awakening that had begun with his golden gaze in the ruins, sang a different song. A song of broken chains, of forbidden whispers in the shadows, and of a destiny far more dangerous and alluring than she could ever have imagined.
The electric shock of their first touch did not drive them apart, it bound them closer, breaking the dam of their restraint. Their clandestine meetings on the twilight borderlands deepened, the conversations igniting like wildfires in a dry forest. The tentative, wary questions gave way to a torrent of confessions, each word a stone cast into the deep, still pools of their indoctrinated beliefs, sending ripples of doubt and rebellion spreading through their souls. They were not just learning about each other. They were unlearning the hatred that had been the bedrock of their entire lives. Alan spoke first of his people's history, his voice of low rumble of ancient pride and profound sorrow. He painted a picture of a time before the curse, when Lupari had an ancient pact with the primal gods of Thaloria. "It was never a curse," he growled one night, his golden eyes reflecting the flickering light of a small hidden campfire. "It was a gift. The change was a bridge between man and the soul of the wild. It allowed us to commune with the land, to protect it, to be its heart and its fang." He spoke of a great betrayal by the first Vesperan ancestors, who feared the Lupari's power and, using stolen, darker magic, twisted the gift. They severed the connection to the mind, leaving only the moon's raw, savage pull. "They made us into the monsters they wanted us to be," he finished, his hand clenching into a fist. "They broke us, and then they began to hunt the broken pieces." His words chipped away at the foundation of Lillian's world. Moved by his truth, she offered her own treacherous confession, her voice barely a whisper in the encroaching dark. She spoke of the Empire's lies. "The divine light our inquisitors preach is a fallacy," she admitted, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. She told him of forbidden archives she discovered in her father's private library, of rituals that had nothing to do with gods and everything to do with power. "The hunts are not just a purge, they are a harvest. The silver weapons, the consecration rites, they are designed to agitate the land's matic. When we kill one of your kind on sacred ground, there is a release of elemental energy. The inquisitors, they drain it. They siphon Thaloria's life force to fuel their cities and prolong their own lives." She looked at him, her emerald eyes shimmering with unshed tears of disillusionment. "Vespera isn't a beacon of light. It's a parasite, and it's slowly killing this land."
Their shared truths created a new, dangerous world for them, an island of understanding in a sea of hostility. One night, their wandering led them to a place that seemed to exist outside of time, a hidden cavern deep in the woods, where the only light came from a sprawling canopy of bioluminescent fungi. Soft, ethereal blues and ghostly greens painted the chamber in a dreamlike glow, illuminating crystalline pools of water and hanging moss that glittered as if spun from silver thread. The air was cool and still, filled with the scent of damp earth and blooming nightshade. It was a sanctuary, a place of impossible beauty where the war outside could not reach them. Here, in the soft, magical light, Alan shed his shirt to tend to a scratch on his arm from a thorned briar. The glowing fungi tossed moving patterns across the hard planes of his chest and back, and Lyrian's gaze was drawn to the tapestry of scars that marred his skin. They were old, mostly, pale, silvery lines that crisscrossed his torso. She knew their origin instantly. They were the marks of silver chains, of blessed scourges, the physical record of her people's cruelty. Hesitantly, she reached out. Alan froze, his muscles tensing as her cool fingers traced the raised line of a scar that ran across his collarbone. Her touch was feather-light, filled not with the revulsion he expected, but with a sorrow that mirrored his own. He watched her, his breath caught in his chest, his heart pounding a violent rhythm. This was the daughter of the man who had likely ordered these very wounds inflicted, and her touch was not a brand of ownership or hate, but a gentle, questioning caress. It was the most profound act of acceptance he had ever known.
Lyrian looked from the scar on his chest to the golden fire in his eyes. The full weight of their impossible situation, of the history and blood that stood between them, pressed down on her. The monster of prophecy and the guardian of the Empire, alone in a secret world of their own making. "I should kill you," she murmured, the words a raw, broken confession of her failed duty. Her voice was thick with a despair that acknowledged the truth. It was already too late. She could no more kill him than she could command her own heart to stop beating. But instead of drawing the dagger at her hip, she rose onto her toes and her lips met his. The kiss was not gentle. It was a desperate, cataclysmic collision, a frantic outpouring of every forbidden emotion they had suppressed. It was a kiss that tasted of rebellion and ruin, of damp earth and starlight, of blood and jasmine. It was the raw, untamed wildness in him crashing against the disciplined fire in her. And in the impact, something new and terrifying was forged. From that moment on, their connection deepened into a fever. The insanity began to build. Their stolen moments of passion left him reeling, but the time apart became a new form of torture. Visions began to plague Alan during his waking hours, flickering, horrifying images of a blood moon, of him lost to the beast, of Lyrian's emerald eyes wide with terror as his own claws descended upon her. He would wake from nightmares with her name a scream on his lips. Lyrian, in turn, found her dreams filled with acts of ultimate betrayal. She dreamed of barring the gates of a Vesperan fortress to aid his escape, of turning her silver blade against her own father, of willingly offering her throat to this beautiful, doomed beast man's embrace, finding salvation in the surrender. Their love was no longer a whisper in the shadows. It was a rising chorus of obsession and madness, pulling them both toward an inevitable, glorious, and devastating crescendo.
The heavens themselves seemed to conspire, bending to the will of their chaotic romance. As the days shortened and the air grew crisp with the coming of autumn, a celestial event of immense power and dire prophecy drew near. The two moons of Theloria, the larger pearl-white orb, and its smaller, swifter silver companion, were to align in a rare solar eclipse, a moment when the world would be plunged into a false twilight, and the boundaries between the mundane and the magical would become perilously thin. To the Vesperan priests, it was an omen of corruption and upheaval. To the Lupari shamans, it was a time of volatile energy, when the beast within was untethered from its usual lunar cycle, prone to unpredictable surges of power and madness. For Alan and Lyrian, it was a summons they could not ignore, a fitting backdrop for the consummation of a love that was itself an eclipse of their two worlds. Their passion, nurtured in stolen moments and whispered confessions, had now festered into a beautiful, agonizing obsession. The visions that plagued them had grown more intense, more frequent, blurring the lines between nightmare and reality, until their time apart was a waking torment. They needed to be together, to anchor themselves in the eye of the storm they had created, to replace the phantoms of their fear with the reality of their touch. And so, they planned to meet on the day of the eclipse, in the one place that felt like theirs, the hidden cavern of glowing crystals. For Lyrian, the journey was a descent into a labyrinth of paranoia. Vespera's gleaming marble halls, once a symbol of righteous strength, now felt like a pristine, polished tomb. The suspicions of her father, High Inquisitor Valthor, were no longer a vague sense of unease. They were thorns, sharp and deliberate, pressing in on her from all sides. He watched her with eyes that held no fatherly warmth, only the cold, analytical glint of an interrogator. Her movements were tracked, her training sessions scrutinized, her questions about Lupari history met with a stony, dangerous silence. She felt his distrust like a physical weight, a suffocating cloak of duty and expectation she could no longer bear to wear.
On the appointed day, as the sky began to take on a sickly, jaundiced hue, she made her escape. It was an act of masterful deception and silent treason. She feigned a sudden illness to her handmaiden, created a diversion in the armory, and slipped through a forgotten servant's passage in the catacombs beneath the citadel. Every shadow seemed to hold the form of a Vesperan guard. Every gust of wind sounded like her father's condemning voice.
She moved like a wraith, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. The wild thrill of her rebellion now tempered by the cold, stark terror of the consequences. As she finally passed the outer walls and melted into the rust-colored woods of the borderlands, she did not feel free. She felt irrevocably sundered from her old life, a traitor to her blood, her faith, and her home. And she ran, not away from something, but toward the only truth she had left. Ellen. Ellen, meanwhile, waited in their sanctuary, a king in a kingdom of glowing stone and echoing silence. The eclipse's energy was a chaotic symphony in his veins, making the beast within him restless and unpredictable. It prowled the cage of his ribs, not with the familiar hunger of the full moon, but with a strange, anxious power that was inextricably linked to his desire for Lyrian. He paced the cavern floor, the ethereal blue and green light of the crystals casting his long, tormented shadow against the walls. He was at war with himself. The visions flashed behind his eyes. Lyrian's smile, then her scream. The scent of her jasmine perfume, then the scent of her blood on his own hands. From the world outside, carried on the supernaturally still air of the eclipse, he could hear the howls. They were distant, faint, but his senses picked them up with perfect clarity. It was the Lupari, his scattered, broken people. But their howls were not of solidarity or sorrow. They were discordant, sharp with accusation and warning. They had sensed to shift the fundamental change in his spirit. They could smell the Besprin scent that now clung to his exiled alpha, not as the stench of an enemy, but as the perfume of a mate. Their howls echoed with a single damning word: treachery. He had turned his back on the pack, on the blood feud, on generations of suffering, all for her. And he knew, with a terrifying certainty, that he would do it again without a moment's hesitation.
When Lilirian finally stumbled through the hidden entrance of the cavern, breathless and wild-eyed, the tension in the air shattered. They crashed into each other's arms, a desperate collision of two souls fleeing the wreckage of their separate worlds. There were no words, only the frantic, reassuring touch of hands on faces, in hair, on the leather of her armor and the bare skin of his chest. They were two halves of a prophecy of ruin, and here, in the heart of their secret world, they were finally whole. As the sun outside was devoured by the twin moons, plunging the world into an eerie twilight that filtered down into the cavern's entrance, their passion, held in check for so long, exploded into an untamable madness. They surrendered to the frenzy, a desperate, almost violent need to claim and be claimed, to forge a bond so absolute that no empire, no pack, no curse could ever break it. Their bodies entwined on a bed of soft moss near a crystalline pool, their movements frantic, driven by a love that was inseparable from their despair. This was not the gentle union of lovers. It was the forging of a weapon, the sealing of a forbidden pact in the flesh. Every touch was a defiance. Every kiss was a vow. As their passion mounted, Ellen fought a titanic battle for control. The beast within him, supercharged by the eclipse and his overwhelming love for her, surged against his human will. Thick, black claws slid from his fingertips, and with an effort of will that made the cords on his neck stand out, he gently, carefully graced them over her skin. The touch was a terrifying paradox, the instruments of death used to trace lines of exquisite pleasure, a hair's breadth from drawing blood. Lilirian arched into his touch, unafraid, her complete trust a more potent balm than any prayer. She welcomed the beast as she welcomed the man, for she knew they were one and the same. Amid gasps of ecstasy and whispered, half-sobbed words of love, they made their eternal vows. They were not promises for a future of peace and happiness, but pledges of solidarity in the coming storm, oaths to stand together against the entire world.
"You are my curse and my salvation," Alan breathed against her neck, his voice a ragged, broken thing. As the words left his lips, as their passion reached its zenith, he lost a fraction of his control. The transformation he had held at bay partially took hold. Lurian felt a shudder run through him, and a ruff of thick, dark fur sprouted along his spine and down his powerful forearms. His face hardened, his features sharpening, and his golden eyes began to glow with a feral incandescent light. He was caught between man and wolf, his desire for her so potent it had triggered the change itself. Lurian looked up at him, at this terrifying, beautiful creature of love and rage, and felt no fear. She saw only Alan, her Alan, in his truest, most complete form. She reached up, her fingers tangling in the new rough fur at his nape, and pulled him down to her, sealing their bond with a final, soul-shattering kiss that left them both breathless and broken in the heart of their glowing secret world. The eclipse was complete, the bond was forged, and the madness had just begun. But shadows lurked, slinking through the moonlit groves. A Vesperan spy, a creature of cold duty and ruthless efficiency, had been a phantom in the tree line, a patient hunter tracking the wayward daughter of the High Inquisitor. His face, a gaunt, colorless mask of devotion to his order, was now contorted in a silent snarl of horror. He had witnessed it all, from the dense thicket of blackthorn bushes, the desperate embrace, the feral kiss, and the partial monstrous transformation that had erupted from Alan's love-fueled frenzy. He saw not a man and a woman, but a human surrendering her sacred duty to a howling beast. To him, this was the ultimate treason, a defilement of the Vesperan bloodline and an unforgivable stain on the honor of the Inquisition. He fled with tales of Lurian's fall, his heart a drum of frantic, self-righteous fury, convinced he had uncovered a vile conspiracy that threatened the very foundations of the Empire.
Meanwhile, in a den carved from ancient roots and shrouded in the deep earthen scent of the Lupari, Thorn, Alan's beta, seethed with a rage that was both personal and tribal. His silver-tipped fur bristled with a raw, protective fury as he confronted his alpha. "She's poison, Alpha. Her blood is a lie, a venom in your veins," he snarled, his voice a low, guttural growl that vibrated through the very stones of the den. His golden eyes, normally so full of a fierce loyalty, were now clouded with a desperate, pleading warning. Her kind slaughtered our kin in the silent glade. They hunted them like animals, strung their hides on the Empire's gates for all to see. Do you not remember the screams of our lost brethren? Thorn wasn't just speaking of a past atrocity, he was reliving it. He had lost his mate, Elena, in that brutal massacre. He had found her body broken and lifeless, impaled on a silver-wrought spear, her eyes wide with the terror he would never forget. And he knew, with a bone-deep certainty, that it was the scent of Vesperian steel, of Lurian's kind, that had stolen her from him. The whispers of Thorn's defiance and the spy's frantic report reached Lurian like a psychic wound. The guilt, once a distant, manageable ache, now surged into a raging torrent of self-loathing. Emotions swirled in a vortex of guilt and longing, tearing her apart. She knew the truth of what Thorn spoke. She remembered the hushed celebrations in the halls of her home, the victorious smiles on her father's face as he recounted the glorious hunt. She recalled the gleam of the silver arrows in the morning sun and the sickeningly sweet scent of burnt flesh and spilled blood that had carried on the wind. She had been taught that it was righteous, that the Lupari were monsters who deserved to be purged. But now, seeing Alan's pain, hearing Thorn's grief-stricken accusations, she understood the brutal, unforgivable lie she had been born into. Desperate to mend the unmendable, to prove her love and loyalty to this man-beast who had become her entire world, she undertook a terrifying act of treason. She broke into her father's meticulously guarded vault, a place she had been forbidden from entering since childhood. The journey to it was an odyssey of fear and adrenaline.
The air was thick with the scent of aged parchment, cold stone, and the faint metallic tang of arcane rituals. She moved like a ghost through the labyrinthine corridors, her footsteps silent on the marble floor. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs as she navigated the network of silent alarms and magical wards. The vault door itself was a masterpiece of Vesperian ingenuity, sealed with a complex series of sigils and a single, unyielding lock. But Lyrian, a student of her father's arcane arts, knew the subtle weaknesses of his craft. With trembling hands, she traced a counter-sigil into the air, her fingers humming with a faint, illicit magic. The lock clicked, and the heavy door, a monolith of obsidian and iron, swung open with a groan that seemed to echo in her soul.
Inside, the vault was a museum of Vesperan power. Gleaming armor, ancient grimoires, and artifacts of immense power sat on pedestals, each one a testament to the Empire's relentless pursuit of dominance. But her eyes were drawn to a single, unassuming velvet cushion in the center of the room. Nestled upon it lay the forbidden artifact, a moonstone amulet. It wasn't the size or grandeur of the other relics that held her attention, but its power. The stone, perfectly spherical and as pale as polished bone, pulsed with a soft, ethereal glow like a captured piece of moonlight. She remembered the whispered legends, the fables of her childhood that spoke of its ability to temper the werewolf's curse, a relic from the age before the first betrayal, when the gods themselves walked the earth. She stole it, her fingers trembling as she closed them around the cold, smooth stone. The act was a severing, a physical cutting of the last ties that bound her to her blood and her home. She fled the citadel and found Alan at their rendezvous point, a small, secluded grotto hidden behind a waterfall, its existence known only to the Lupari. She was a vision of wild-eyed desperation, her clothes torn from her frantic journey, her hair tangled with leaves. She pressed the cold stone into his calloused palm, her confession a raw, broken whisper. "It's said to mend what's broken," she had said, though she knew it was a lie, a band-aid on a gaping wound that had already begun to rot. Alan's fingers, long and strong, closed around the amulet. He felt its power, a cool, calming presence that seemed to soothe the wild, chaotic energy that always simmered just beneath his skin. But it was Lyrian's trembling hands, her tear-streaked face, and the profound guilt in her emerald eyes that truly held his attention. He saw the full weight of her sacrifice, the world she had burned to the ground just to be with him. Their love, once a fragile spark, deepened into a consuming obsession, a frantic, desperate need to protect each other from the gathering storm. Each stolen touch was a promise of apocalypse, a silent vow to bring ruin to their worlds for the sake of this twisted, beautiful bond. The amulet was a token of their desperation, a symbol of their willingness to shatter everything and everyone who stood in their way.
The Empire of Vespera struck first, their retaliation swift and brutal. High Inquisitor Valthor, Lyrian's father, a man whose heart was as cold and unyielding as the marble of his halls, did not merely send a hunting party. He unleashed a raid of unprecedented scale and ferocity on the Lupari dens. He had been a predator his entire life, and now, fueled by the betrayal of his own daughter, his meticulous rage was a weapon of mass destruction. He led the charge himself, a gleaming figure in polished steel, his every movement a testament to his cold, righteous fury. He commanded a legion of elite Inquisitor guards, their armor glinting like frozen starlight, their bows strung with a single purpose: extermination. They did not aim to capture or subdue. They aimed to end. The attack came at the pre-dawn hour, a time when the Lupari were at their most vulnerable, sleeping in their earthen burrows and hidden caves. Silver arrows, fletched with the feathers of the sun-forged griffin, rained down like a lethal, shimmering meteor shower. Each arrowhead was infused with Vespering holy water, a concoction designed to burn a werewolf's flesh and sever their connection to the moon, turning their sacred gift into a source of agony.
the air filled with the sickening whistle of the arrows, followed by the wet thud of impact and the tormented howls of Alan's kin. Alan, in his human form, had been sleeping beside Lyrian in the grotto, the moonstone amulet a comforting weight against his chest. But the first pained scream from his packmates ripped through his dreams like a blade. He was on his feet in an instant, the primal roar of a besieged alpha tearing from his throat. The transformation was not a gradual, painful shift this time, but a convulsive, furious explosion of muscle and bone. His clothes shredded, his body contorted, and within moments he was a 7-foot-tall creature of sinew, shadow, and molten goldass. He fought like a demon loosed from the pits of the underworld. His claws, as long as a man's forearm, tore through steel armor as if it were parchment. He was a whirlwind of teeth and fury, a single-minded force of vengeance. He ripped apart the battle lines, his enraged screams a counterpoint to the pained cries of his pack. But even in his savage, battle-frenzied state, he was held back from full-throated savagery by an internal, agonizing torment. His mind, as he was mauling Ovesper's guard, was plagued by visions of Lyrian. He saw her face, her eyes filled with terror, her body broken and lifeless at his feet. The beast's instinct was to kill, to tear apart every enemy. But the man's love held him back, a leash of pure, concentrated terror. Was she with them? Was she an enemy? Had she led them here? The questions were a poison that diluted his rage, making him hesitate for a fraction of a second, just long enough for a silver-tipped bolt to graze his shoulder, sending a searing, white-hot pain through his flesh. Lyrian, torn asunder by the sight of her people, her father's guards, slaughtering the man's family she had come to love, felt the world tilt on its axis. Her heart was a battleground, loyalties clashing with brutal force. Her duty, her blood, her entire life had prepared her for this moment, to stand with her people and purge the world of these monsters. But standing here, watching her father's men fire arrows at the very heart of the man she loved, felt like a self-inflicted wound. The moral and emotional torment was a physical presence, a suffocating weight on her chest.
She did not draw her blade against her father's forces, but she fought with a chilling, surgical precision from within. She moved through the chaos of the battlefield, a ghost in her silver and green armor, her face a mask of cold determination. She whispered false intel to her comrades, her voice as smooth as silk. "Left flank is clear. Push that way," she'd say, knowing full well that Aelin's most formidable warriors were hidden in the shadows of the rocks. "The Alpha is wounded. He's retreating towards the river," she'd shout, sending a squad of elite archers directly into a trap laid by the Lupari. Her hands, trained to be lethal, were stained with the blood of her allies, not through violence, but through deliberate, calculated sabotage. She was a saboteur, a silent traitor in the ranks of the Empire, and with every act of deception, a piece of her soul chipped away, a sacrifice made for the man she loved. In the chaos of the burning trees and the frantic cries of battle, they reunited. Aelin, his shoulder bleeding from the silver wound, his golden eyes still blazing with a feral fire, found her standing alone on a ridge, her hands stained with the very blood she had sworn to protect. He stalked towards her, his body language a mix of predatory grace and wounded confusion. Was she friend or foe, a traitor or a savior? Lyrian ran to him, throwing her arms around his immense, powerful form. She did not flinch from the heat of his fur or the sharp primal scent of his rage. She clung to him, her body shaking with a wave of emotion that was equal parts grief, terror, and a terrifying sense of freedom. "I've chosen you," she sobbed into his chest, her voice choked with tears. The words were a final, irrevocable severing of her old life. She had burned the bridges behind her, and now she was standing with the man her entire world had told her to hate. Aylin's rage, which had been a consuming fire, now dissolved into a mix of feral pride and profound terror. He had seen her betray her own people for him. He had watched her whisper lies and lead her comrades to their deaths. He felt a deep animalistic satisfaction. This woman, this glorious, dangerous creature, was his. She had chosen him. But beneath the satisfaction, a new, more terrifying thought took root. If she could betray her own family, her own blood, her own empire, what would stop her from betraying him? His eyes, still blazing with a feral right, looked not at her, but at the burning forest around them, at the bodies of the Vesseran soldiers she had sent to their deaths. The price of their love was being paid in blood, and he knew, with a chilling certainty, that this was only the beginning. Betrayal, once a distant concept, bred a fast and consuming insanity. Thorn, Aylin's beta and the keeper of his conscience, was consumed by it. He had watched his alpha, his brother, fall into the thrall of the very family that had shattered their pack. He could not stand by and allow this love to corrupt Aylin further. He rallied a faction of the pack, the older, more traditional werewolves who remembered the taste of Vesseran blood on their fangs and the ache of loss in their hearts. They were the ones who saw not a lover in Lyrian, but a traitorous witch, a poison infiltrating their bloodline. They branded Aylin a traitor, bewitched by Vesseran sorcery, a puppet to a human he should have torn into pieces. Their howls, once a sign of unity, were now sharp with accusation and hatred. To pack, once a single body with a single heart, was now fractured, bleeding from a schism that Aylin's forbidden love had caused. The emotional weight of this betrayal from the pack he had sworn to protect was a physical blow, a pain that cut deeper than any silver blade.
Simultaneously, Lyrian faced her father's wrath in the dungeons of Vespera, a place of cold stone and chilling echoes. High Inquisitor Vathor, his face a mask of disappointment and fury, did not need to raise his voice to be terrifying. His was a quiet, surgical rage, the kind that dismembered a soul instead of a body. She was lashed with whips of braided leather and silver thread, each strike a searing agony that scarred not just her skin but her very soul. He did not seek to punish her body, but to break her will, to purge the werewolf's madness from her mind. He questioned her for hours, his voice a low, relentless drone, using every interrogation technique he had honed over a lifetime of hunting her kind. He pressed on her love for Alan, mocking it, twisting it, calling it a perversion, an illusion woven by a beast. But with every blow, with every hateful word, Lyrian's resolve only hardened. The pain, instead of breaking her, became a testament to her love, a visceral reminder of what she was willing to endure for him. Alan, having learned of Lyrian's capture, did not wait for the cover of darkness or the counsel of his remaining allies. His mind was a storm of fear and rage, his instincts screaming for her. He stormed the gates of Vespera in full beast form, a colossal, terrifying force of nature. He was a creature of myth and legend brought to life, his roars shaking the very foundations of the marble citadel. He tore through the outer guard, their spears and arrows useless against his furious charge. He was an unstoppable avalanche of fur and fangs, a whirlwind of claws and muscle, leaving a trail of shattered steel and broken bodies in his wake. He found her chained in a cell, her body bruised and broken, her spirit defiant. He did not speak. He simply ripped the iron chains from the wall, a feat of inhuman strength, and cradled her in his arms, his massive form a shield against the world. They fled into the neutral lands that lay between Theloria and Vespera, a wilderness of unforgiving mountains and whispering forests. But their escape did not bring them peace. The emotional toll mounted with every stolen moment. They were haunted by their shared reality. Nightmares gripped them both, visions born from their darkest fears. Alan dreamed of the moon, a gaping, blood-red wound in the sky, and he saw himself, not as a lover, but as a ravenous beast, devouring Lyrian, his claws tearing through her flesh as if she were prey. The taste of her blood was a visceral, terrifying reality in his dreams. Lyrian, in turn, dreamed of betrayal, of her duty overwhelming her love. She saw herself, a blade of polished silver in her hand, plunging it into Alan's sleeping heart, the ultimate act of treason against their bond. Their love, which was once a spark, was now a blazing inferno, threatening to consume all that was left of their humanity. It was a love that had driven them to commit unspeakable acts, to betray their blood and their people, and now it was turning inward, devouring them both from the inside out. They had escaped their physical presence, but they were now trapped in a mental one of their own making, a gilded cage built of madness, paranoia, and a love so intense it threatened to rip them apart.
In the heart of Theloria's forbidden peaks, where the very earth was a canvas for chaotic energy, their fragile bond reached delirious, unsustainable heights. This was a place where ley lines, the invisible rivers of magical power that flowed beneath the world, converged in a turbulent nexus. The air itself hummed with a wild, untamed magic, a raw force that twisted reality and amplified every emotion. It was the perfect, terrible sanctuary for their insane love. They lived like fugitives and gods, their days a haze of desperation, and their nights consumed by a furious, all-encompassing passion. The world outside the peaks, the fractured empires, the warring factions, was a distant, fading memory. All that mattered was the space between them. The Moonstone Amulet, Lyrian's final, desperate gift, was no longer a simple artifact. During a ritual performed under the chaotic energy of the eclipse, it fused with Alan's very essence. He had worn it constantly, its cool weight a constant reminder of her sacrifice. Now, as they stood on a windswept plateau, bathed in the eerie light of the celestial event, the stone began to pulse with a furious, golden light. It burrowed into his skin, merging with his flesh, his bone, his very soul. It was a symbiotic bond forged not of magic, but of raw, untempered love and a desperate need for control. The amulet, a vessel of ancient magic, had responded to his deepest desire. It granted him absolute control over his shifts. No longer would the moon dictate his transformations. He could now shift at will, a master of the beast within. His power was no longer a curse, but a weapon, honed by a consuming passion. But this gift came at a devastating cost, one that Lyrian felt before Alan did. As the amulet fused with him, a deep, bone-weary exhaustion settled over her. The vibrant energy that had always thrummed beneath her skin, the star-forged silver essence of her bloodline, began to wane, siphoned away by the amulet as it powered Alan's transformation. Her skin, once alive with a healthy flush, grew pale like frost, becoming translucent and fragile. The shadows beneath her eyes deepened, and her movements, once so graceful and strong, were now slow and deliberate, as if she were moving through a thick, invisible fluid. Her love, a force that had been her strength, was now quite literally draining her life away. "Take it back," she pleaded, her voice a thin, reedy whisper that was barely audible over the howling wind. She clutched his hands, her own feeling like porcelain against his. "It's taking my life. You'll be the death of me." She begged him, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and resignation. She had given it to him to save him, to make him whole, and now it was killing her. But Alan, a man driven by a love that had tipped over into obsession, refused. He saw her weakening,
her lights dimming, but his logic had long ago been consumed by a fire in his heart. He saw not a sacrifice, but a merging, a final, ultimate union. He believed in his madness that this was their ultimate destiny, for their two essences to become one.
His embraces turned desperate, laced with a raw, almost violent need to hold on to her, to keep her from fading away. He kissed her with a ferocity that bordered on pain, and in the throes of their passion, his teeth would graze her delicate skin, not to draw blood, but to mark her as his, a primal claim on the last piece of her she had left to give. Their emotions, unbridled and amplified by the chaotic energy of the peaks, erupted into screams of passion and pain. They would shift from tender kisses to frantic, biting embraces. Lyrian's cries of ecstasy would bleed into sobs of agony as she felt her life force leaving her. Alan's growls of savage devotion would become frantic pleas for her to hold on, to not give up. The land itself seemed to respond to their tumultuous emotional state, trembling with seismic shudders. The sky, a canvas of bruised purples and angry reds, mirrored their internal storms. In that desolate, beautiful place, their love became a vortex of ecstasy and agony, an insane, self-destructive dance that promised to either save them or consume the entire world. Pursuers closed in, a relentless tide of vengeance and righteousness. High Inquisitor Valthor, his heart a stone of unforgiving ice, had allied with Thorn's rebels. This was not a calculated, strategic alliance, but a union forged in a shared hatred for the abomination of Alan and Lyrian's love. Valthor, with his legions of steel-clad soldiers and his arsenal of silver weapons, represented the cold, rigid order of the Vespran Empire. Thorn, with his fractured pack of feral werewolves, embodied the wild, untamed fury of Deloria. They were two ancient enemies, their blood feuds spanning generations, now standing side by side, united by a common goal: to end the chaos that Alan and Lyrian's union represented. The message was clear and chillingly simple. They were hunting a single, intertwined target, a two-headed monster that had defied the natural order. In a cavernous lair hidden deep within the heart of the Forbidden Peaks and lit by bioluminescent crystals that cast an eerie, ethereal glow, Alan and Lyrian plotted their defiance. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and raw magic, the ley lines thrumming around them like a living thing. They were two souls against the world, forging a last stand in the cradle of their madness. They worked feverishly, their hands moving with a desperate, frantic energy, forging weapons from merged magics. Lyrian, a master of Vespran alchemy, purified silver, a substance that had always been anathema to Alan's kind. Alan, with his newfound control over his shifts, infused the silver with lunar essence, drawing upon the raw power of the Moonstone amulet that was now a part of him. The result was a set of blades and arrows that hummed with a chaotic, terrifying energy. Silver, lethal to werewolves, now woven with the very essence of the moon, a paradoxical and devastating creation. They were not just weapons, they were physical manifestations of their love, their intertwined destinies, and their shared insanity.
But even as they worked, doubt festered, a silent, corrosive poison. Lyrian confessed a vision to Alan, her voice trembling as she spoke of a future she had glimpsed in the chaotic energies of the peaks. She saw a child, their child, a hybrid of man and beast. Not a miracle, but a monster. She saw this child, a creature of immense and uncontrollable power, with eyes that glowed, with both her emerald light and Alan's molten gold. It could end the war, she whispered, her hands shaking, or it could destroy the world. The weight of this possible future, of a child that could either be a savior or an apocalypse, was too much to bear. Alan's howls, once a sign of a free and wild spirit, now echoed her cries, a guttural sound of shared pain and terror. He saw the same vision, a reflection of their own chaotic union, a love that had defied all laws and would now produce a living consequence that could unravel reality itself. Their love, which had been born of slaughter and nurtured in secrecy, had twisted into a vortex of ecstasy and agony. Their every glance was a battle between adoration and fear. Their every touch was a negotiation between destruction and devotion. They were insane in their intensity, a shared madness that transcended reason. They were a force of nature, but a force of nature that was in the process of tearing itself apart, unable to reconcile the beautiful, all-consuming passion they felt with the terrible, world-ending consequences of their union. Their love that they had fought so hard to protect had become the very thing that was driving them to the brink of insanity, a beautiful, terrifying trap from which there was no escape. The atmosphere in the cavern grew more oppressive. The bioluminescent crystals seemed to dim, as if mirroring the despair settling over them. Lyrian felt the cold seeping into her bones, a cold that wasn't from the mountain, but from the knowledge of what she had given up and what she was losing. Her life force was a slow trickle now, a constant reminder of the price of Alan's power. She looked at him, at the magnificent creature of love and fury he had become, and saw not just the man she loved, but the monster her love was creating. Alan in turn looked at her, at the beautiful, fragile woman who was fading before his eyes, and saw the cost of his strength, the terrible bargain he had made. They spent their last hours in the lair in a feverish, desperate embrace, their bodies entwined at a silent, tragic dance. They spoke in whispers of a future they both knew was a lie, a future of peace and happiness that their actions had already incinerated. They were two broken halves of a shattered whole, clutching at each other as the world they had defied closed in on them, ready to deliver a final, brutal judgment. They were no longer two people. They were a legend in the making, a cautionary tale of a love so powerful it could not exist without destroying everything around it, and in the end, themselves.
The breaking point arrived in a storm-swept valley, a desolate, unforgiving expanse where jagged peaks tore at the bruised, swollen sky. The air, thick with the scent of wet stone and electrical ozone, crackled with a malevolent energy that mirrored the tempest brewing in the hearts of those who now stood ready to deliver their final judgment. It was here that Thorn, Alan's former beta, the man who had once been his shadow and his conscience, chose to make his move. He ambushed them with the cold, calculated precision of a seasoned hunter, his feral faction of werewolves emerging from the rocky crevices like ghosts. Their eyes, a chilling mix of silver and gold, were not filled with a warrior's pride, but with a venomous, self-righteous hatred. They did not howl, they growled, a low, ominous sound that was a direct threat to the fragile peace that Alan and Lyrian had fought so hard to maintain. The confrontation was not a battle of claws and fangs. It was a duel of broken allegiances and festering wounds. Thorn, his silver fur matted with rain, stepped forward, his gaze locked on Lyrian. His voice, a low, gravelly snarl, was filled with a pain that was 1,000 times more lethal than any weapon. "Did you ever tell him?" he began, his words dripping with a bitter, poisoned sweetness. "Did you ever tell him about the silent glade? Did you tell him that your people were the ones who slaughtered our families?" His eyes, a haunting echo of Alan's own, flickered with a raw, ancient grief. "Did you tell him that the silver that killed my mate, that the very silver that cursed her to an endless torment, was blessed by your blood?" Lyrian's heart, already a fractured thing, shattered. The memory of the silent glade, a place she had only known through her father's victorious tales, now came flooding back in a horrifying, visceral reality. She remembered the glint of the Vesperan holy water on the silver arrows, the cheers of her comrades, the cold, righteous conviction in their eyes. She had been a child then, a student of the Inquisition, and she had watched as her father had performed the sacred rites, anointing the silver with her family's blood, believing it was a necessary sacrifice to empower the hunt. She had been a part of it. Her blood, the very essence of her, had cursed Thorn's mate.
She had been an unwitting instrument of his eternal torment. She looked at Alan, at the man that she had so desperately tried to protect, and the weight of her betrayal crushed her. She had been running from this moment for so long, from this final terrible truth. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was a raw, broken thing, like shattered glass. "Thorn, what he says is true," she admitted, the words ripping from her throat. "My father, he used my blood to empower the silver. My family celebrated the slaughter of your people." The admission was a blade turned on herself, a confession of guilt so profound it tore at the very fabric of her soul.
A moment of chilling silence hung in the storm-swept air. Alan's golden eyes, which had been locked on Lyrian's face, now turned to Thorn, and in them burned a rage so pure and so incandescent it was almost blinding. "You love a killer," Thorn snarled, his voice rising to a fever pitch. He had waited for this moment, for the truth to be laid bare, to see his alpha's heart break. Alan's rage unleashed, not on Thorn, but on the very ground beneath him. He partially shifted, his body convulsing as fur erupted along his spine and down his arms. A low, thunderous growl tore from his throat as he lunged, a terrifying creature of vengeance. He did not aim to kill, but to maim, to punish. He mauled Thorn, his claws tearing through his beta's hide, but he held back, sparing him at Lyrian's plea. "Stop!" she screamed, her voice cutting through the thunder. "Please, Alan, don't! He's your brother!" Her words, filled with a desperate agony, were the only thing that could pierce his red-hot fury. He stopped, his chest heaving, his form still partially shifted, and he looked at the fallen beta, his brother, and then back at the woman who had begged for his life. The storm raged around them, the rain washing over their faces, mingling with their blood and tears. Thorn's faction, stunned by their alpha's mercy, slowly backed away, their legions shattered. Lyrian and Alan stood alone, two figures in the center of a vortex of emotional and physical ruin. Their reunion, forged in this moment of raw, unvarnished truth, was not a gentle one. Their bodies collided, not in passion, but in a frantic, desperate act of forgiveness. They held each other as the world they had built crumbled around them. It was a love that was defined not by its purity, but by its ability to endure betrayal, pain, and the darkest secrets. They had stood against the world, and now they had to stand against themselves. The emotional toll of their existence was a physical reality, a constant state of a raw, beautiful, and utterly insane love. Their connection was a paradox, a source of both immense strength and debilitating weakness, a love that was as much a curse as it was a salvation. And in the rain-swept valley, they clung to the last remnants of their sanity. The emotional whirlwind reached a fever pitch, spiraling into a maelstrom of obsession and psychological warfare. High Inquisitor Valthor, the master of manipulation, and a man who understood the nature of curses far better than any Lupari shaman, captured Lyrian. He didn't do so with a show of force, but with a cunning so precise it was like a surgeon's blade. He lured her into a trap, a place where the ley lines were thin and a specific ancient rite could be performed. In the heart of a forgotten shrine, amidst crumbling stone and the faint scent of long-dead magic, he used ancient rites to bind her will. This was not a physical binding, but a mental one, a subtle corruption of her mind. He didn't want her dead. He wanted her to be a weapon, the ultimate instrument of vengeance against Alan.
She returned to Alan not as his lover, but as a spy, her heart warring with the compulsion that now controlled her every thought and action. The spell was a subtle, insidious parasite. It didn't turn her into a mindless puppet. Instead, it twisted her most profound emotions, her love for Alan, her guilt, her terror, into a new lethal directive. The spell told her that the only way to save Alan from the curse that was slowly consuming him was to kill him, to end his life swiftly and mercifully before the beast completely took over. It was a beautiful, terrifying lie, a perfect perversion of her own love. She would look at Alan and her mind would scream at her to end his suffering, to plunge a dagger into his heart, to do what he was too weak to do himself. One fevered night, as Alan lay sleeping, his form human, vulnerable, and utterly exhausted, she nearly slew him with a hidden dagger. The blade, a sliver of star-forged silver that she had concealed in her boot, gleamed in the moonlight, filtering through the cavern entrance. Her hand, guided by a will that was not entirely her own, was steady, poised to strike. But at the last possible second, her love, her true will, asserted itself. The sight of his peaceful, sleeping face, the memory of his tender touch, his raw devotion, shattered the illusion. She collapsed in sobs, the dagger falling from her trembling fingers and clattering on the cold stone floor. "End me," she begged, her voice a raw, broken whisper. "End me before I can hurt you, before I do what he wants me to do." She was a prisoner in her own mind, a human with a heart that loved a monster and a will that demanded she destroy him. But Alan's love, forged in the crucible of their shared madness, held firm. He didn't see a spy or a traitor. He saw a woman in agony, a soul being tormented by a force far greater than she could fight alone. He understood the nature of her imprisonment, the subtle way Valthor had used her love against her. He knew that physical strength wouldn't break this spell. It required an act of ultimate trust and devotion. With a tender, horrifying resolve, he shattered the spell with a single symbolic bite. He leaned down and bit her deeply on the neck, a mark of pack, a primal claiming that was not an act of violence, but an act of love. He was not branding her as a possession, but integrating her into the very essence of his being, his spirit, his pack. The spell, unable to withstand the raw cower of the Lupari bond, broke with a psychic shriek. Her mind, once a chaotic battlefield, was now a single, unified force, bound to him. The emotional whirlwind peaked, a final, mind-bending act of devotion. Insanity was in every glance, in every touch. Their love was no longer a beautiful tragedy, but a beautiful, terrifying battle. Each moment together was a negotiation between destruction and devotion, a constant struggle to prove to each other and to themselves that their love was not a sickness, but a bond powerful enough to defy the gods. They were insane in their intensity, a shared madness that transcended reason, their souls so intertwined that they no longer knew where one ended and the other began.
The armies converged on the Obsidian Summit, a place of ancient power and dire prophecy. The frigid air, thin and sharp, carried the scent of anticipation, of steel, of fur, and of a hatred so deep it had become a force of nature. On one side stood the united legions of Vespera, a sea of polished silver armor and cold, unyielding resolve, commanded by High Inquisitor Valthor. On the other, the fractured Lupari packs, now reformed under the banner of Thorn's rebels, a tide of teeth and fury. They had put aside their differences to face the abomination that Alan and Lyrian's union represented. The summit, where ley lines converged and prophecies foretold the end of curses, was to be their final, bloody stage. Alan, now a man fully in control of his shifts, yet fraying at the edges of his sanity, led a desperate charge against the united foes. He was not a werewolf anymore, but something new and terrifying, a force of vengeance born of grief. His every movement was a testament to the years he had spent as a beast, a feral grace that belied his human form. His eyes, once molten gold, were now a wild, flickering mix of man's rage and a beast's untamed hunger for battle. He wielded a blade forged from their merged magics, a weapon of silver and lunar essence that hummed with a chaotic energy. It was a physical manifestation of his insanity, of the love that had driven him to this breaking point. He fought not with a plan, but with a blind, all-consuming fury, his only thought to protect the woman at his side. Lyrian fought with him, a ghost of her former self, yet more lethal than she had ever been. Her body, drained of its essence by the amulet, was weak, but her spirit, now bound to Alan's, was unyielding. She moved with a terrible, silent grace. Her silver blade, once her family's legacy, now turned against her own kin. Her heart, once a battlefield of loyalties, was now a single-minded force of devotion. She saw her former comrades, the men and women she had trained with, the faces she had known since childhood, and she felt no hesitation. They were obstacles, enemies standing between her and the man she loved. Every strike was a severance, every blow a final, irrevocable act of treason against her blood.
Battles raged with feral howls and the clash of steel, the sounds of war echoing through the jagged mountain passes. Blood dyed the pristine snow a visceral crimson, a violent testament to the hate and vengeance that fueled the conflict. In the melee, Valthor, a dark figure of cold purpose, confronted them both. His voice, a low, controlled roar, cut through the din of the battle. "Daughter, you've damned us all," he bellowed, his face a mask of disappointment and fury. "You have cursed your bloodline and doomed the Empire. This is the consequence of your perversion." His words were meant to be a final crushing blow, a weapon forged from a lifetime of expectation and duty. And for a moment, they worked. Lyrian's strike faltered. The sight of her father, the man who had taught her everything, filled her with a terrible, conflicting mix of love and revulsion. Emotions, so long suppressed, flooded her. A daughter's love for a father she had betrayed. A woman's fierce passion for the man he was trying to kill. The conflict was written on her face, in the brief, agonizing hesitation of her blade. In that split second, the beautiful, terrifying insanity of their love reached its climax, a final, brutal collision of all the forces that had shaped their lives. The air at the Obsidian Summit crackled with more than just the clash of steel. It was a symphony of vengeance, betrayal, and unyielding love. Thorn's betrayal culminated in a final, brutal duel with Alan. The two werewolves, once brothers in blood and spirit, were now adversaries consumed by an all-encompassing hatred. They were a blur of fur and fangs, a whirlwind of muscle and fury as they clashed, their roars shaking the very ground beneath their feet. Thorn fought with a cold, focused rage, fueled by the memory of his cursed mate. Alan fought with a wild, desperate ferocity, a protective instinct so powerful it eclipsed his sanity. He was fighting not just for his life, but for the future he desperately, madly believed he could have with Lyrian. Lyrian, fighting her own battle nearby against her father's forces, saw the duel. The sight of Thorn, his eyes filled with the pain and she had inadvertently caused, and Alan, his form a whirlwind of desperate rage, was a visual echo of her own internal conflict. Her heart, a battlefield of its own, screamed at her to intervene, to stop the bloodshed that her choices had initiated. She broke away from the skirmish she was in, her movements a flash of silver and emerald, and threw herself between the two enraged beasts.
The moment stretched into an agonizing eternity. A silver blade, wielded by a Vesperin guard, intended for Alan's heart, instead plunged into Lyrian's side. The shock was immediate and profound. The world seemed to slow down. Alan's roar of rage turned into a cry of utter agony. The blade, a testament to her old life and her father's order, was now a fatal wound, a final, brutal irony. The pain, sharp and cold, was a physical manifestation of her sacrifice. She fell, the world blurring into a kaleidoscope of red and silver, her lifeblood a crimson stain on the pristine snow. As she bled out, her weakening hand reaching for Alan, the Moonstone Amulet, a part of Alan's very essence, activated fully. It had been absorbing her life force, her star-forged silver essence, preparing for this final terrible moment. It was a cosmic exchange, a balancing of scales. The curse that had bound the Lupari clan for generations, the curse that had torn Alan between man and beast, was finally lifted. The raw energy of the moonstone, now fully charged, surged through Alan's body. His form stabilized, the chaotic shifts ending forever. He was no longer torn between man and wolf. He was simply Alan, a man, but a man forever marked by the beast and the memory of the woman who had died to save him. The change was instantaneous and devastating. Alan's screams, no longer the roars of a beast, but the raw, human cries of a man in insane grief, rent the air. He cradled Lyrian in his arms, her life slipping away like sand through his fingers. The raw, unfiltered agony of watching her die, of knowing her death was the price of his freedom, was too much to bear. It broke him, but in his brokenness, he became a force of unimaginable power. He didn't fight with the rage of a beast, but with the cold, methodical fury of a man who had nothing left to lose. He rose, a new, terrifying legend, and turned the tide of the battle with a terrifying efficiency. He was no longer a werewolf fighting for survival. He was a man consumed by grief, a human weapon on a rampage fueled by the purest, most savage form of sorrow. But even as he won the war, the victory tasted like ash.
In the devastating aftermath of the battle, with the remnants of Elthor's legions retreating and Thorn's rebels scattered, the world fell silent. The air, once filled with the cacophony of war, was now eerily still. The only sounds, the soft hiss of melting snow and the mournful groan of the wind through the jagged peaks. Alan was a lone figure atop the obsidian summit, a desolate monument of black rock and crimson-stained snow. He was no longer the raging beast, nor the tormented man. He was a hollowed-out shell, his mind a wasteland of grief. He cradled Lyrian's fading form in his arms, her life slipping away with the last vestiges of the pale, exhausted sunlight. The world was dying around him, but all he could see was her. He focused on the delicate curve of her cheek, the last flutter of her eyelids, the faint, final whispers of the woman he held. Her emerald eyes, once so defiant and full of life, were now dimming, the light within them fading like a star burning out. Her hand, so cold and fragile, reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the lines of his agony. "Our love was madness," she whispered, her voice a ghost of a sound on the wind. The words were not an accusation, but a quiet, profound truth. It was a madness that had shattered empires and pacts, a love so insane in its intensity that it could not exist without a catastrophic price. The price was her life. He looked at her, at the woman who had sacrificed everything for him, and felt a grief so vast it threatened to consume him whole. He had his humanity back, the curse finally lifted, but at what cost? He was whole, but she was broken. The victory over their enemies was meaningless. The peace that would follow was a bitter, hollow thing. He howled to the heavens, a raw, tormented sound that was neither man nor beast, but a terrible, beautiful fusion of both. It was a scream of agony, of rage, of a loss so profound it had become a physical presence in his chest. In his insane grief, he channeled the amulet's power in a final, desperate rite. The moonstone, now a living part of his soul, pulsed with a terrible, consuming light that cast an ethereal glow on their faces. He was no longer trying to bend the magic to his will. He was trying to shatter the very laws of life and death. He wasn't trying to heal her body, but to save her soul, to keep the last piece of her with him forever. With a final, agonizing surge of power that tore at his own essence, he bound their souls eternally, a final, beautiful union in death. He felt her essence, her light, her spirit, merging with his, becoming a part of his very being. She lived on in his shifts, a phantom presence guiding the beast within, a silent, powerful spirit forever intertwined with his own.
He would feel her laughter in the wind, her resolve in the cold stone beneath his feet, and her love in every beat of his heart. She was a presence, a ghost of a touch and a whisper of a name, forever a part of the man she had died to save. The ritual had not just lifted a curse, it had created a legend, a living testament to a love that was so powerful, so insane in its intensity, that it could not exist without a catastrophic price. The eclipse was over, but for Alan, the darkness had just begun. He was a survivor in a world he had helped destroy, a king without a queen, a man forever haunted by the beauty and the tragedy of a love that had shattered worlds.